All right, it's officially 6 o'clock and we're having participants arrive. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Julie Zonheiser will be introducing Ron Sinton. Thank you so much, Julie. A wonderful and amazing person herself, a longtime clean energy action activist and leader, and now doing a lot of work with Empower Our Future. But we do let her go skiing regularly. Thank you, Julie. Take it away.
Well, the whole point of being here is to have more snow, right? We work on climate change so we can go skiing and have a good planet. Hi, my name's Julie Zonheiser, and it's my honor to introduce Dr. Ron Sinton. Ron is a Colorado native with 40 years of experience developing and applying new tools and analysis to solar cell research and development and manufacturing. Ron's background gives him a unique perspective on how we can bring on more renewable energy. Ron worked on a PhD studying high efficiency silicon solar cells at Stanford, was one of the founders of SunPower, and started his own manufacturing company, Sinton Instruments, now located in Boulder, which exports electronic equipment used in silicon solar cell manufacturing worldwide. Ron has written on an enormous number of peer-reviewed technical articles, and in recent years has added modeling clean energy systems with a particular interest in following the progress of our local utility, Xcel Energy. Ron has served as a bridge between solar cell technical specialists and the utilities, politicians, and regulators that make decisions regarding use of solar and wind at utility scale. To help all of us be more informed and effective electricity users, I'll turn it over to Dr. Ron Sinton.
Thank you, Julie. I'll pull it up. Okay, so I'm going to talk about electric customers, how electric customers can enable low-cost clean power. And in this talk, first I'll discuss the basic characteristics of solar electricity and wind in Colorado. And starting about now in Colorado, you can really choose how clean your electricity is that you charge your EV with, for example. This could have a huge effect on accelerating a clean energy transition, but we really have to prove that it'll work. And there are skeptics. So that's part of this talk. Now in Colorado, the elements of clean energy that I'll talk about tonight are wind, solar electricity, which is often called PV, EVs, and storage. And I like to use a lot of data. It's my favorite thing. And I'm going to use Colorado data from the Xcel balancing area. And so you can look up this data from the Energy Information Agency Grid Monitor, and it's at this link here. And what I'm talking about tonight is mostly using this data from Colorado, but wherever you might be in the country, you can look at this data yourself, and you'll see that what I've done is actually very simple, and you could do it for yourself. But when you go into this site and you click on your favorite balancing area, you can see the electricity generation over here in megawatt hours versus a date. And I downloaded this just last week. So this is the electricity in Colorado from last week. And in dark brown, you can see when the coal plants were generating electricity. In green, you can see the wind. In light brown, this is the gas generation. And then in yellow is the solar, the photovoltaics PV. And so first, let's look at the solar in more detail. And what I've done is I've plotted it for every hour for the entire year. But these are the averages for spring, fall, summer, and winter. And we have the electricity from solar versus the hour of the day. And it should be no surprise that you get the most electricity from solar around noon. What might be surprising is that it's so consistent that if you compare even summer and winter, we get quite a lot of electricity in the winter as well as summer. But the average for each hour of the day, and these are 24 hours in the day, the average doesn't tell the whole story because these are variable renewable energy resources. And so we want to look at how much it does vary from day to day. And so there are 91 days in each season. So if, for example, we look at 10 o'clock, we can look at all 91 days and see how much the solar varies from day to day. What we see is that most days, especially in summer, are very sunny. And there are a few rainy or cloudy days that pull down the average, which is shown in black. But on the whole, you get a lot of very sunny days, and you almost never get days without a lot of solar energy in the middle of the day. There are very few hours here. Of course, winter is more challenging, but even in winter, on most days, you're getting a lot of solar energy. And so this is the characteristic of solar. So let's look at wind. And this again is the average, the electricity from wind versus the 24 hours in the day. And the interesting thing to see here is that in 3 seasons of the year, spring, fall, and winter, you get almost the same amount of electricity from wind each of the 24 hours a day on average. In the summer, it's a little bit different in that you get less electricity in the center of the day around noon than you do in the evening. You get more just as the sun sets in the evening. So let's look at the variability. And again, we'll look at let's say a specific hour and see how it varies during the 90 days in the season. And wind is quite a bit different than solar because you see that you can have windy days and you can have calm days. And there are a lot of very calm days when you have essentially no power from wind. And you have everything in between. You have everything from nothing to half of your wind to all of it on any given day. And again, we see that in the summertime, we have a lot of days that are very calm in the middle of the day, but that's kind of okay because solar, of course, puts out most of its power during the middle of the day in summer. And so that complements wind very well. So let's see what happens when you put it all together. And so what I'm going to do is start with a very renewable grid. And Excel put out its proposal for its resource plan. And so they're proposing to have 55% wind and 25% PV in 2030. And so I'm going to show the fraction of this that will be from fossil fuel at every hour of the day throughout the year. And so this is what it looks like in this visualization. And I'm going to show this on several slides going down, so I'll explain it in some detail. And so you start on January 1st at this left corner and go through the year to December 31st. So there are 365 days in the year, 365 columns of data. And then going from the top to the bottom, you go from 1 a.m. in the morning through the morning till noon, the afternoon, at midnight. The color scheme is that bright green is 0% fossil generated electricity. This is clean electricity, is green. Black as coal is 100% fossil generated electricity. So the main features that you see here are, of course, daytime is very clean. And you can see that the day-night boundaries very well. You can see dawn and dusk. You see the short days in January, November, and December, and you see the long days in June. The other things you see here are the afternoon air conditioning peaks, when we're using more energy and the fossil fuel plants have to crank up a little bit. But the other thing you see are the challenging dark, cold nights in winter when the days are short and the nights are long. In the middle of the day, you can see that the energy is very clean. However, at night, when you have the wind, you see this variability that you can have a few windy days that are very clean, then a few calm days that are dirty. You can have even most of a month of April, which is very clean because it's windy at night. And so the main point here is that daytime is clean due to solar electricity, and nights can be clean or dirty. But what this means is that you can choose to use clean electricity. And you can do this even in a single day. You see that on this day, you have a few hours where you had 100% fossil fuel, but you have quite a few hours when you're perfectly clean electricity, 100% renewable. And so this is in 2030, and it's a projection for this clean grid. So let's kind of roll it back to the present and then go a little ways into the past. And for the present, I'm going to use 2023. This is the projection for what XL will have in 2023, which is 39% wind and 15% PV. And it looks similar. Since I showed the really renewable grid, you can see the same features here, that days are cleaner. They're no longer totally clean, but they're cleaner. And you can see the issue that we have with the air conditioning peaks and the dark, cold winters, which are shown here. And I should have mentioned that the reason I chose 2023 is that in the last resource plan in 2018, the PUC approved for XL to install 1 gigawatt of PV during this year, 2022, which will be available in 2023. So this is really the year when Colorado's electricity supply, at least from XL, switches from majority fossil to majority renewable electricity. And you get this strong feature, this strong difference between daytime and night. Now it's worthwhile to go back a little farther and look at where we were in 2019. And in 2019, we had mostly wind and only about 4% solar. So you don't see the stark night and day difference. And it's very important to realize how this historical data is used in utilities and by regulators, because you want to be sure that your planning is grounded. So you use a lot of historical data. And in the past, when things move slowly, the best prediction of what your demand or your generation would be next year is what it was last year. And so you use maybe the last 5 years of data to set a baseline in order to plan into the future. But what we notice here is that this would be a very poor basis for planning for this or this. But that's an issue that comes up in the utility planning, that you really have to look forward because things are changing so fast these days. And so I'm going to point out another thing with this map, and I flipped back to the 2030 totally renewable, well, 80% renewable grid. And there's an issue that you get into when you have such a clean day. And that's that essentially you have mostly PV, but also some wind supplying all of the demand during the day. And so the person that, or the company that installs the next PV plant will find no demand for it. So the price drops. And so the next PV plant, when you have so much PV in the daytime already, might actually cost more than you can get paid for the electricity from it. This is an issue because it's kind of a natural ceiling on the amount of PV you can get, somewhere in this 25% range. And this is promoted. Okay, I got ahead of myself. But what I wanted to tell you about this graph is that this is a good visualization of the difference between day and night, but you can't pull numbers off of it very well. So I'm going to show some numbers from this graph. And what I did is I averaged, for each hour, I averaged all 365 days to give the annual average fossil fraction of fossil fuel for each hour of the day, up to 24 hours. And what we can see here is that even when the grid is 80% renewable, if you're using power at night, you're using 40% of the power you're using is actually generated by fossil fuel. If you use power sometimes around noon, you'll actually be 5 times cleaner than at night. And this is a main takeaway from this talk, is that once you start to get to a renewable grid like this, with quite a bit of PV at 25%, then it's 5 times cleaner during daytime than at night. And another implication of this is if you want to do energy efficiency to save carbon dioxide on the grid as well as energy, if you save 1 kilowatt hour during the night, you'll actually prevent 5 times more CO2 from being emitted than if you do the same 1 kilowatt hour of efficiency savings during the day. So this kind of map also gives you a lot of information to prioritize how to spend your money on energy efficiency. So now I'm going to talk about another practical implication of this, and that's that Xcel in August introduced charging schedules for EVs, and they introduced 2 night schedules, and the first one from 9-ish in the evening to 6 a.m., the second one from midnight-ish to 9 o'clock in the morning, and then a day schedule from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. But for those of us that get up at 6 a.m., we know that it's not daylight this time of year. So I added a schedule here, which is from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Now, the main purpose of these is to keep EVs from charging in the summer demand peak, which is more or less 3 in the afternoon until 10 p.m. And once we have PV, it'll be more like 7 to 10 p.m. But they want to keep you out of that window. And so they're promoting some specific schedules to do that. And so to start, we can see that we've talked about 3 different times so far. I've shown you data for 2019, 2023, and 2030. So if you want to charge your car, I'll show you 3 choices. The first choice would be that you buy an EV in 2019, for example. You bought an EV in 2019. You charge at night using one of these 2 schedules. They're pretty much the same. And what it means is that you slowly improve from using 77% fossil fuel in 2019 to something a little better than 40% fossil fuel in 2030. And this is even though the grid is 80% renewable, because you're using energy at night, which is much more difficult to clean up. You haven't gotten down as far as you'd like to. The choice number 2 would be that you use the daytime schedule once the sun is up. And you get a very rapid improvement by 2023 because of this 1 gigawatt of PV that's going in. And then it continues to improve until you're only using 10% fossil fuel by 2030. And so this can be a very clean schedule and much faster to clean up the grid with your car than charging at night. But you actually have a third choice. And that's that you buy your EV in 2019, you charge during daytime, and you coordinate the growth of EVs on the grid with growth of PV. And so basically the EVs are charging on new PV. And when you do this, you have immediately a clean EV for the entire decade, and you save all this carbon dioxide that otherwise would have been emitted for charging your car. And the amount of PV you need is something like 2 kilowatts of PV, of solar electricity per EV. Or if you're thinking on the utility scale, it's about 2 gigawatts per million cars. So this is where I wanted to tell you about the problem of having too much clean energy in the middle of the day. And that's that you can't, the next plant may not be profitable. And so I clipped some headlines out of the internet for how this is kind of promoted, largely by nuclear advocates that want to emphasize the limits of solar. But it is a real issue, and you can already see it in California. But this one from MIT, the lurking threat to solar power's growth. From EPRI, a primer on wind and solar value deflation. This one from the Breakthrough Institute, quantifying solar value deflation in California. But this isn't a law of nature. This is a problem to be solved. And the way to solve it is to take demand at night and move it into the day, which is what you're doing when you're charging your EV during the day. And this gives you demand during the day that allows you to install more PV profitably and break this 25% PV barrier. The second thing you can do is use storage. And it's actually doing more or less the same thing. You charge batteries on clean energy during the day, which increases the demand for PV during the day. And then you use PV at night by discharging the batteries. And so you clean up night that way. These are the two strategies that allow you to break this boundary of 25% PV and go up into the 30, 35, 40% range. When you do a lot of this, the optimum for Colorado may be something in the 40% range for PV with 60% wind. So it's worthwhile to talk a little bit about electricity grids. And historically, you've had the fossil and nuclear grid paradigm. And what this is that you have all of these power plants, mostly coal or gas in Colorado, that are scaled to meet the summer demand peak. And so you have too many of them at late night and in the morning when no one's using electricity. And so they're just sitting idle. And so what this means is that you have low electricity prices from late night into the morning. And so the obvious rule under this specific case is that you might charge your EV from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. when electricity is cheap. The emissions intensity is what we saw for 2019, which is relatively constant as a function of time of day, maybe a little dirtier during the summer demand peak. Now, if you look at the renewable paradigm, you have excess capacity during daytime, as we very clearly saw will be the case, or on windy nights in Colorado. And so you get the low prices when the renewables are available. And so the idea is to charge your EV during daytime if you want just a simple rule, or when wind and PV are available. You can charge on wind at night, but you have to know which nights are windy and which nights are calm out where the wind power plants are. And in this case, the emissions intensity is lowest when the renewables are available. Also, the prices will be lowest when the renewables are most available. And so just to compare these two, if you're shifting from a fossil grid to a renewable paradigm, but you cling to this rule of thumb to charge your EV at night on cheap electricity, what you'll find is that this routine EV charging at night prolongs the use of baseload coal. It's the perfect load to keep a coal plant on at night. And even once the coal plant retires, what it means is that you might need to replace it with gas in order to supply this power at night on the nights when the wind is not available. On the other hand, with the renewable paradigm, the lowest prices are when the renewables are most available. And so it attracts demand into the low price time when renewables are available. And the low prices that result from installing renewables attracts more demand, which uses more renewables. And so you get this virtuous circle that really accelerates the cleaning up of the grid. So the question is, can we do this? Is it practical? And when you go to the national labs and you talk to the engineers and the scientists and you ask if this kind of demand response scheme, and demand response is when you change the demand to meet the supply instead of changing the electricity supply to meet the demand. So you ask these engineers if this should be shown as a resource right next to PV, wind, and batteries. And you get this sort of answer. And I've got it from many, many people. Basically, Ron, in general, I really don't work on demand response. It's too messy and too difficult for me to think about properly. And so, you pursue it through an email chain, and eventually, technically, all this could work. It comes down to changing the rate structures, which involve the regulatory process. All rates need to go through the PUC. Rate structure redesign and implementation is incredibly difficult. And so what this is saying is that if you want to change this through the utility and the regulators, it will be very difficult and take time. It involves politicians, utilities, regulators, customers, ratepayers, and it can take a long time. And we know this because the time of use rates that are just getting implemented now were started with a procedure in 2017. And for me in Boulder, they'll become active in 2025. So you've got this 8-year lead time if you go through the normal channels through the utility and the regulator. But what about a bottom-up solution? Will people just want to use clean energy if they have all the information? I can do this tomorrow. I can just choose when to charge my EV so that it will be on clean energy. If there was an app that simply did it for you, would you sign up? Or do people need to be incentivized with rate structures? And this option is the one that could take very long time. And the grid can change fast, and we're seeing it change very fast by just installing PV. But the demand side should be able to change even faster, but in fact, it changes slower. And we know how to do this. We would do this with the day ahead and week ahead renewable forecast. And this is available. All utilities have this forecast to know how many renewables they'll have for the next 7 days, because they need this to decide if they have to spin up a coal or a gas generator to supply power tomorrow, or if the wind will do it for them. And we don't have this in Colorado with Excel because it's considered proprietary. Excel is actually one of the leaders in developing renewables forecast, and they've worked with NCAR and published many technical papers. So they're actually very good at this. But I had to go for this example to the website for the Southwest Power Pool, which is the states just to the east of us, from the Dakotas on down to Arkansas. And you can download from their website this, and this is the demand shown on the vertical axis versus the day. And I downloaded this a week ago when I was preparing this presentation. So this was the 7-day ahead forecast. This is the demand that they forecast, and this is the wind power that they forecast. So it's very obvious when you would want to charge an EV, and it's when there's a lot of wind. Or alternatively, it's very obviously when you don't want to charge the EV, which is when there's very little wind and it's mostly coal. And so I can picture, some kind of simple website. This could be on your phone, for example. And in Colorado, we showed that most days are clean, but you can have a cloudy day. And so weekends are great because demand is low and the mix will be a little more renewable. Most days are clean. At night, we saw that you can have clean nights, dirty nights, clean nights, a couple dirty nights. And so the user or their app could do it for them, could basically plot a path through this renewable energy and end up using much cleaner energy than if they use just the average on a random basis. So we also know what happens if we don't do this, if we don't make our preferences known through which energy we buy. And we know this because we have a resource plan in front of us right now that's at the PUC, the XL 2021 Colorado Resource Plan. And they made their own demand projections for EVs. And on this axis, we show the demand in gigawatt hours per year versus the year from 2020 to 2050. And we can see that most of the demand growth is EVs. And then when you look at when they assumed the EVs would charge, you can see that it's between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. So they're using the rule that applies to a fossil fuel grid, and they're projecting it out to 2050. And so the result of this assumption is that you're creating a new need for baseload power at night supplied by coal, gas, and wind to meet this new demand for EVs. So I took this plot from their resource plan and I replotted it to make it a little more clear for the purposes here. And what I'm showing is this total demand in summer of 2040 from their plot, and then what fraction of it they anticipated would be EV charges and which hours the EVs would be charging. And that's shown here. And we can see that this is matched in the short term to coal. In the long term, when you retire the coal plants, you might replace them with gas. However, what if we did this instead? We saw from the color maps of when energy is clean, that it's clean during daytime. And so if we move the charging into daytime, we could have this kind of demand profile. And in both of these, you actually want to avoid the demand peak, kind of 5 till 10 p.m. And we can obviously do that. So we take care of the reliability of the grid at the same time. And so if you have this demand profile then the cheapest power that you can install to fill this demand in your resource plan is PV. So this would correspond to 1.2 gigawatts of PV. So in effect, what you've done is you've shown that you're ready for renewables. You've put your preference in strongly that you want renewables, which are cheaper and cleaner. And so one thing that I hear a lot of when I give this pitch to policy sorts of people is, why not just charge a battery during daytime? Or they might ask me, if you have PV, should you charge a battery or your EV? And the answer, of course, is that you should do both. You should put in enough PV that you can both charge batteries and charge your EVs. But this is a question worth thinking about. What is the right proportion between these two things that you could do? And so it's useful to think about your car. And the most expensive thing in an EV is its battery. And I did some web searching. It's not an easy thing to find. But let's say that the cost of the battery, the parts cost of the battery, is something like $7,000. And the price you might pay for it might be on the order of $15,000. And you may not need to charge your car 100% up from 0 to 100%. You might only have to charge it about a third of the way for the amount of driving you did on the day. So you might need something like a $500 battery that you charge during the day in order to charge your car at night. So you could look at this as you buy an EV and you could have a $5,000 option in order to give you the option of charging your EV off of PV at night through a battery. On the other hand, when you charge it directly, you can avoid the cost of the battery, the resource intensive battery, and you get the lowest possible price. So your first choice is to use energy, renewable energy, when it's being produced. And then you clean up, and you, for convenience, you will want batteries so that you can use power at night, but you'll want to use them very strategically, because for the time being, they are more expensive. And when you think about it, they actually use power. They don't generate power because they're not 100% efficient. So we should think outside the box here. And I encourage this because you don't want to use rules of thumb that were developed for the fossil fuel utilities of the past. And let's think about the EVs. They need about 10 hours of charging per week. We've seen that everything can change from COVID. We've seen that work patterns change. Is the new norm to have the car in the garage 1 to 2 days per week, in addition to the weekends? It could be easier than you think to get 10 hours of charging in for your car during daytime. Daytime during weekends is even better. When you think about traditional demand response to try and use demand to fix reliability problems on the grid, it's always been the utilities saying, we'll pay you to turn off your conditioner on your air conditioner on hot days in order to help with grid reliability so we don't have to build more power plants. And so you're being inconvenienced by turning your air conditioner off, so they have to pay you something. But do people really need to be paid to change habits to use clean energy? Do people care how clean their energy is enough to change how they use it in small ways or big ways? Even doing small things could have a big impact if a lot of people did it. But we have to know how many people will change and how much energy will they shift. And these are the questions that we need to answer to make a compelling case to the skeptics that this sort of thing should be used in grid resource planning in order to install the cheapest and cleanest electricity. So I'm coming towards the end here, and I'll say that this talk was not just about EVs. EVs were just the vehicle, so to speak, that I used to show this concept. Actually, any fraction of your total electricity use can be synchronized with renewables. And this enables lower cost because you're using the renewables without storage and with minimum backup. It's the lowest pollution. What you're doing is rewarding renewables immediately at the expense of fossil fuel. And I have some extra slides if someone asks me about the details of this in the questions. But the main effect may be that you're rewarding renewables in the next resource plan. Because if we can make the compelling case that people really want to use clean energy and will shift their habits a little bit to do it, you can save a lot of money in generating this power to supply this load. And the last thing that I mentioned was that energy efficiency spending can also focus on using renewables when they're available. And that map that I showed is a very good tool for implementing this. So the organizers asked me to put together some action items, so I did. And it's basically, you can ask your city, county, or state, are we ready for renewables? You don't have to just sit back and watch for the clean energy transition. You can actually push it along by being ready for renewables. Do we have access to an accurate renewables forecast? That's the first question. Have we established a baseline of electricity use versus hour of day and season? And, ask your government, are you using electricity preferentially when the renewables are available? And are you doing it yourself? Then on the infrastructure side, is daytime workplace charging prioritized in building codes? Are EVs charged during day at government workplaces, libraries, rec centers? Are building codes taking into account load shifting, such as synchronizing heating and cooling with renewables to the extent that's possible? Do they have any thermal storage in them? And last is pilot projects. When I look around the country, there's very, very little data on doing this sort of thing. And so if you could convince your city, county, or state to do this, it would be useful to the entire country, or actually the world, to see if you can pull renewables onto the grid by showing your preference for renewables. And this is really the more radical part of this pitch that I'm giving you, because people will believe that you should change your habits to adjust to the grid that you have to use it as clean as it can be. But it seems to really ruffle some feathers when you say that you should do this preemptively in order to pull renewables onto the grid, that you need to show where the demand will be in the utility projection for the next 20 years, or else they might build the wrong thing. They might build more gas plants or whatever we don't want. So in conclusion, with the future of clean grids, flexible loads like EVs, but a lot of other things as well, can be dirty or clean. Choosing the clean hours to use power will accelerate the transition to clean energy. And so I've tried to make the compelling case that we can use renewables to enable the clean grid, but will we? I think that's an open question, and maybe that's good for discussion and questions tonight. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ron. That was terrific. Chris and Julie, I'm guessing you're going to follow up with some questions.
Yeah, this is Chris Hoffman. I've been tracking the questions along the way and some comments. There was the first question was from RJ Harrington. He says, thanks, Ron. This is one of your earlier slides, and he asked, does this data include our rooftop and or community solar, or is it only PSCo owned generation?
So this includes all of the solar. In the resource plan that Excel just put out, they're taking the distributed solar out of the demand side, and they're putting it into the supply side in order to do their calculations best. So I'm using that data that includes the rooftop solar and the community solar gardens.
Great, thank you. And as I go through these other questions, I can encourage people, if they do have questions, just to put them into the click on the Q&A and type in your questions. Next questions from Martin Volker. He says, I'm sure this will be discussed, but if not, how will Excel's time of use rates affect an EV owner's strategy to charge during the day? Is that only viable if they draw from their own PV or solar?
No, the time of use rates that they implemented aren't optimized for this scheme because they don't reward it.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't penalize it in a huge way. They have a shoulder rate, which starts at 1 p.m., where the prices go up. But you're always able to charge at the lowest available price from 8 a.m. to 1 during even summer. And I think a little bit more than that during the other seasons. So it's not optimal. In the settlement agreement for the time of rate case, it's going to be reviewed in 2025. So what we really want is to reward people for using the lowest cost energy by lowering their rates during those hours. And I think this is why we need data, is we want to make the case. We want to make a strong case when that comes up for review.
Great, thank you. And Alvin Knott asks, will the PUC alter the pricing scheme to encourage daytime use rather than nighttime use?
And the answer is we have to make the case.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's happening in California. In California, it's kind of 8 years too late also. They're no different than Colorado. We should have been warned, but only now are they putting in time of use rates with the lowest rate during daytime, especially in San Diego, but it's spreading through California to do exactly this.
And then we have a comment from Martin Volker. Wireless charging at scale may be necessary to perfectly align EV charging with high renewable power. And then
yeah. So I think that's more true if you want to align with wind at night, because you don't have a sense of whether the wind is blowing at Cheyenne Wells, Colorado.
mm-hmm.
For the day-night thing, you're going to be awfully darn good if you just charge it during the day rather than night, and maybe charge a little less if it's cloudy, if you happen to notice if it's cloudy. But even if you don't bother to discriminate between cloudy and sunny days, you'll end up much better, as I showed with the annual average.
Great. Comment from Chuck Kuchter. Excellent presentation, Ron. Well, we need to get buildings off natural gas and electrify them. That can shift the peak demand from summer afternoons to winter nights. Have you studied the impacts of this future change on the demand profile?
What he says is absolutely true. And so this was my point here, that we really have to focus on energy efficiency for nights. And with demand shifting at nights, which would be some thermal storage perhaps, so that you actually heat your building with the heat pump during the day and then it goes through the night. There are studies on this, there aren't enough. But in my thinking, what I proposed here is actually promoting the lowest cost grid for people to shift their power use to the lowest cost renewables. And cost is a big factor for switching from natural gas to electricity. As we go to the renewables grid, we want to take care that it's a cost-effective renewables grid, and that helps us get off gas through beneficial electrification. Winters are a problem. That's what we should focus on.
Thank you. And a comment from Tom Corlett. Ron, very much appreciated. Great stuff. And I will follow up with you about strategies for our community and Black Hills Energy IOU. And then a question from Cody Orek. What about the app, Ron? Is anyone working on it now, or are you, with a smiley face?
I'm doing this on several tracks. I've actually proposed it to Excel formally through their demand management meetings, stakeholders group. I did this 6 months ago. It didn't go anywhere so far. I've proposed it to Boulder. I could do it myself if we saw interest. RMI has similar products, and in parts of the country where these schemes are rewarded financially with the right rate structure, there are companies that do this. The exact scheme that I'm proposing here, the algorithm that actually says we should use energy as if the grid that we want exists, so that it pulls it in, is a little bit different than what Watt Time, which is owned by RMI, uses. So yes, it exists. I think we can do better, and I'm trying to do it. I'd be interested in hearing from people that would support that.
Okay, we have a few more questions, but I notice it's just about the hour, and we do want to keep this to an hour to honor people's time. It isn't a power hour, but I don't know. Ron, would you be available to stick around for a little bit? There are a few more questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Also, I answer email.
Okay. Is your email available, or do you want to give it?
Yeah, it's easy to find if you just Google search me.
Okay. Is Sinton Instruments?
Ron,
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So do you want to just take it from there on the Q&A, or do you want me to keep reading them to you?
I haven't figured out how. You better read it.
Okay. So Joe Braden says, so I take it there's a mismatch between pricing and renewable availability. So following your advice will cost a little more until the utilities adjust. True? And if so, guess as to how many people will do so.
So I don't think it necessarily costs more. Most people aren't on the time of use rate. As I mentioned, in Boulder, it doesn't come into effect until 2025. But even if you are, there's only these few hours during the afternoon when you conflict with the shoulder rate. And so I don't think it's a significant amount of money. So there were some proposals that could have been a lot worse for the time of use rate, but the one that was adopted is fairly friendly. And so I think it's almost neutral.
Mhm.
I don't think you'd spend much money doing this. You just won't make money doing it.
And a comment from Conrad Geiger. Thanks to Ron for all of his work on this important issue. He helped me significantly on this policy article on the topic. And he's got a link to the article. I also think we should not give up on faster changes through the PUC. In other words, couldn't the legislature mandate that Excel make its predictions more transparent?
Yeah, I'm kind of working on that too. It seems that what I did is I proposed it to Excel, and then if Excel doesn't want to do it, then you go to the legislature and say, Excel's not going to do this. Do we have another option?
Uh-huh.
Or we do it ourselves. But you know, that pushes them along as well. You know, if they realize that they can't gate this, that it can happen without them, they may want to get on board.
Okay.
Ron, I just want to, jump in and thank everyone who is here, because we still have a number of the original attendees. Thank you so much for coming. Obviously, Ron's going to keep talking, but we understand if you drop off, we will have the video of this event posted on the Empower Our Future website in the next couple of days. So that's all. Thanks. And Ron will now continue.
Great. So from Steve Whitaker, would you say that renewable advocates should intentionally shift their electric power usage to daytime and away from nighttime to create an increased grid demand at the time of maximum PV production?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Great.
Because the utility takes the demand as they see it, and then they design resources to meet that demand. And so if we don't give that signal to them, then they don't get it. And the other fraction of this is that even before the utility switches its resources, by putting the demand during the daytime or during windy nights, what you're doing is you're shifting demand from fossil fuel to renewables, and the price will actually change a little, the wholesale price. And so you end up rewarding renewables at the expense of fossil fuel in the minute that you do it. And so that part of the equation doesn't have to wait for the utility to put in new resources or retire resources. So there's kind of two prongs to this. And this is exactly what I'm saying we need to do, is basically put our vote in. You could say that what you're doing is boycotting coal and buying renewables, and it would be true.
Thank you. From Dan Luber, please ask Ron to talk for a minute or two about if there might still be needed upgrades to distribution grid's digital infrastructure that might not have been done yet. I.e., put another way, can Ron seat of the pants the distribution grid sensor investment to get access to the needed data for this approach? And also ask Ron if in general, is there any other communication infrastructure needed to pursue this approach?
So I would say nothing is needed, because the utility doesn't control your demand now. And the internet could be the way to disseminate this information. As we saw, you can have a day ahead or 7 day ahead renewables prediction. And so if your EV charger just downloaded that forecast, it could do it for you. Or you could just look at your phone. I don't know how many people know, but the iPhone, when you plug it in to charge at night, it doesn't charge to 100% because that's bad for the battery. It's learned that it learns when you're going to unplug it in the morning, and it charges to 80%, and then it finishes it off just before you unplug it in the morning. And so your cell phones, the internet, these are the kinds of applications that exist that are far more advanced than what you need. With respect to the grid infrastructure, the distribution grid, more information would help with a lot of things. They would help with this. They would help with knowing what the value of solar is to the grid. So that's all good to have more information, but I don't see it as necessary for this scheme, because it seems that the internet can disseminate the information, and then people just charge at the right times. And these times are not going to be when the grid is most overloaded, because that's when the grid is under the greatest stress in a renewable situation, is right at dusk when the sun's going down. And so if you're using the renewables prediction, you won't be charging just after sunset during the demand peak. So
Okay.
I don't think it's a big problem, but of course, more information is better when it comes to understanding the distribution grid.
Thank you. Larry Milosevic says, to create an app using forecast renewables production, what action is needed to get such data publicly available from Excel or somewhere else like NCAR? A PUC mandate? Legislation?
I would think it would require legislation, but it's also, it can be duplicated. Excel is an expert at that, so it would obviously be good to have access to their data because they've calibrated it with their wind and solar power plants. But it's relatively straightforward to take weather service data that is available and write a little bit of software that turns that into a renewable prediction. It doesn't have to be perfect to be better than what we're doing now. And it could be what we have to do just to push a little so that they get on board with the plan.
Thank you. Martin Volker notes that there's a group forming to fight to preserve the Louisville net zero mandate for new construction. That mandate is in danger because people understandably want to rebuild fast and cheap. Colorado Renewable Energy Society is involved, and several passive house architects as well. And Martin Volker gives his email, and you could probably check this out through going to cress-energy.org, Colorado Renewable Energy Society.
That's good information. Obviously, we would want to make it fast and cheap rooftop solar.
Yeah. Robert Carmichael says, great work. Would votesolar.org be a good partner in this effort?
That's an interesting question. I think Vote Solar, with the time of use rate in Colorado, they wanted to have very high prices during the day because that would be a subsidy for rooftop solar due to the net metering. And so I think they have to be convinced that in the long-term interest, what you need to do is have a bigger market for solar. What they did was basically try and implement high prices during the day to have a subsidy for rooftop and tell people to charge their car at night on cheap electricity. So they wanted high prices during the day and cheap at night, because if you have a rooftop array, that's beneficial to your pocketbook, but
Okay.
not to the climate.
Okay, and then a couple of comments of appreciation. Cody Ork says, let us know what support you need. And Lynn Siegel says, make it the world you want.
Yeah,
And then from RJ Harrington, as a resident of Louisville, a member of that group, Martin, locals do need to understand how to access this information. So the question is, with whom is Cress engaging? And RJ gives his email address, rj@sustainableactionconsulting.com. So maybe the two of you could get into conversation. A comment from Don Parcher: another reason not to charge EVs at night is that some Teslas have caught fire while charging or after reaching full charge. Oh, and another comment from Bob Carmichael about that it's important to get this information out to organizations like Protect Our Winters and other groups in all charging, in fact. There was a note from Conrad Geiger saying his previous posting was done by KK Duvivier, whom you have worked with before.
Yeah.
And then a long comment from Holly Metzler. I am a member
I
of.
figured out these comments, so I can read it quickly.
Cool, great.
She's a member of a rural electric cooperative, and they actually have a bus program where it's a vehicle to grid. So that's kind of the next stage beyond just timing your EV charging, to use the batteries in vehicles as batteries to support the grid. So that's all very good. She says that it was only started in December, so she doesn't have much data yet.
Ron, are there any other last comments you'd like to make before we wrap up?
No, I think I remembered to say most of what I wanted to.
Okay. Well, once again, on behalf of everybody who's been listening in and all the folks at Empower Our Future, we really appreciate you doing this, not just presenting it, but all the work you did to get this idea together and present it so clearly. And it's very compelling, and we really thank you for it.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk to your audience.
Great. So people, as Mary said, people will be getting informed about when this recording will be available up on the Empower Our Future website. And also keep tabs on the Power Our Future website, because we will be having more Empower Hours. So thanks very much, everybody, and good night.
Okay, thank you.